Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Melly Santora and I am a proud April board member and I'm facilitating today. So thank you for joining us for this workshop called Expanding, Engaging and Energizing Peer Support Groups. I'd like to mention a few housekeeping items before we get started. So first, when you scroll over the screen, a menu bar pops up. Depending on what device you are using, you can find that menu bar at the top or the bottom of your screen. That's where you'll be able to find closed captioning for today's session. And you can view the captioning by selecting the CC tab on the menu bar. For sign language interpreting, you can find the lovely Sally right there on your screen. If you would like to change the size of this screen, when slides are shown, you can select the line in the middle to kind of move it back and forth to make it larger or smaller to work for you. If you have any technical issues, please use the chat feature. You can find the word bubble in that same menu bar. If you'd like to turn the chat feature off, if you're using a screen reader, you can do that by pressing Alt and H, or please use the info and help section on the conference website for more help. For Q&A times, please note that there's a Q&A box on the menu bar. Please only submit questions there as they may get lost in the chat. To ask a question or make a comment, you can also use the hand option on the menu bar that allows us to know that you have a question. For those of you on the phone or using keystrokes, we ask that you use *9 or Alt and Y on your keypad to raise your hand. We will then let you know when you can unmute. You can select the unmute option or Alt and A if using keystrokes. Remember, if you join in the conversation today, to please try and keep the background noise to a minimum so that we can hear you all very clearly. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and ask Joelle to get us started and kicked off for today. So take it away, Joelle.
Thank you. And I'm going to share my screen here to begin with. Get that going. So good morning. Hi, I'm Joelle Austin. I am the Wyoming Independent Living Program Manager. And I am a white female in my early 50s with short gray hair. I have some glasses on. My pronouns are she and her. And I am a proud person who has disabilities, both invisible and a few visible disabilities, as I have MS. And just want to make sure that everybody knows that I too am a proud person with a disability. And it's very important to my job and to my life that I have realized that it's pretty cool to have a disability and pretty proud of the things I've done since having a disability. So today we want to talk to you a little bit about what we did as a group in independent living the past few years. I was in a presentation yesterday and they were talking about being able as a independent living specialist or as a facilitator for peer groups, or even when you're doing outreach as a Center for Independent Living, one of the big things is to be able to learn, and the importance of that as a skill, to use that learning to find out what your areas are doing, what your communities need. And I think that during this past two and a half years, we've done nothing but that, is learn what our consumers really needed, learned what we could do as a still to be more active in our communities, to be more accessible in our communities. And I'm super proud of our independent living team as they had a lot of obstacles, as we all did throughout the last two and a half years, and how they came out with this. And we're still learning. Of course, we're not perfect in everything, but we use that learning and that flexibility to really increase and expand, engage, energize our peer support groups. So the next slide, slide number 2, is a map of Wyoming and Wyoming Independent Living. We cover the eastern half of Wyoming. So we have 5 centers across eastern Wyoming, and we have one person that works in their area from their home. Throughout these 5 centers, from the most northern point, where our centers are here in Sheridan County, to our most southern point is Laramie County, where our center is in Cheyenne. That is about 325, 350 miles. So it's quite a jaunt from each of our centers. Our coverage area, we cover 55,000 square miles. So we have a lot of miles to cover, and a lot of driving. There's a lot of space in between our centers. Before the pandemic, we were each of our centers were doing things the same, but maybe we had separate calendars, we had separate activities in all our centers, our different centers. We were, kind of talking about the same thing, but we might have been given separate messages about what we just were about in that center or that area, instead of as a Center for Independent Living as a whole. We had certain centers that were really active, people were coming to peer support groups. And then we had certain centers that maybe the peer support groups weren't so active. And maybe there's kind of nothing worse than setting up a peer group, getting it advertised, working really hard to what you thought people were going to come to, and then that day getting started and nobody showing up. So we had kind of a flux of a lot of people in one area and not so many, or one person, 1 or 2. That's not a really good peer support group to get started. So then we had, as I said, we had some groups in some areas that were really excited about advocacy, and they were talking together, meeting in our Casper area, maybe meeting more so about advocacy, and we were starting to get some advocacy things going in those areas. And then we were trying to get some advocacy things going in our Laramie County area, and it just wasn't working so much. Our Laramie County area is where Cheyenne is. It's our capital. So we were trying to get some advocacy going, but you would think, with our capital, but we couldn't get people to come to the center and couldn't get a group going. So we kind of started doing some internet things, started to try to get some groups going. And we did start to use Zoom even before the pandemic to get going with some advocacy things in Eastern Wyoming. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. We also had begun pre-pandemic working with the Rural Institute, or RTC, Rural Institute of Montana, at University of Montana, to facilitate online living well in the community and the community living skills workshops. So we were kind of coming together with those as well. And then, I don't know if anybody noticed, but a pandemic hit. And it really affected Wyoming. I know, we kind of thought at the time we might skate out of the pandemic, out of COVID, because we were so rural. We thought maybe that COVID would just skip over us. So things affected us a little later in the pandemic, I think, than they affected others throughout the nation, but they still came to a head, and they brought about a lot of questions for us to think about. So we got together as a group, and some of the main questions were, how do we keep, our peer groups going? We had to shut down totally. So all centers were shut down. We weren't reaching out to consumers. We weren't having any in-person peer groups. How can we do peer groups when we can't meet in person? That's just really hard to think about at the time. How do we keep, our education going? How do we educate people on disabilities through this time, and how our SIL can help? How do we get more consumers to be involved instead of losing consumers? We lost a lot through the beginning of the pandemic. We weren't open, people weren't coming to center activities. How do we connect with our consumers? Oh gosh, if we can't see them in person. And then we were noticing a lot, like everybody, our consumers were struggling. They were struggling with social isolation. Wyoming is one of the top in the nation as far as suicide rates are concerned, and those were increasing by quite a bit. So we knew our consumers were having trouble with social isolation. They were having trouble engaging. They weren't able to go to their churches. They weren't able to talk with their friends. They weren't able to go to the senior centers. So we had that question. We knew that was a big concern for our consumers. And then we decided, how are we going to get through this? It's affecting Wyoming too. COVID came, the pandemic hit us with a fury. So we got to decide how we're going to not only get through this, but how are we going to thrive as a SIL. So some of the things that came about that I guess you would call good things or silver linings during this time of the pandemic were that we had already been meeting as a team, as an IL team. We had already started meeting, monthly or biweekly over Zoom. We had been using Zoom because we are so spread out to meet as a team. But since we couldn't ever really meet in person, there were some big gaps there. We decided to meet weekly. The IL team came together, started meeting weekly, started really talking together about how to get through this, how to get to our consumers, how to get our peer groups still going, still do peer groups and things like that. So that was a really good thing. It brought our team together and made us very cohesive and able to talk with one another. When I was talking about earlier about our advocacy group, the advocacy group had been meeting, and they had been meeting once in a while. We decided to start a Zoom meeting and meeting monthly about advocacy. Well, through that meeting, we found a need really for not just an advocacy group to talk about things and kind of maybe complain about them, but to do some work. A grassroots group that started having a platform was going to take things, to our legislatures. We needed that grassroots group. We called it our working group. So during that time, our Cheyenne, our advocacy group was formed throughout Eastern Wyoming, started in Cheyenne with a few people that weren't from Cheyenne. And because nobody was showing up for the peer advocacy groups, we just decided we're just going to do this all of Eastern Wyoming in all our service area. So we started doing that, got that group going, and they named themselves the YDPAC group, which stands for the Wyoming Disability Peer Advocacy Committee. And like I said, it's a grassroots group that has a platform now that they finished, on things that are affecting people with disabilities in the state of Wyoming. and they're going forward with making those advocacy needs known. So another thing that came about was that we realized we got to embrace Zoom. We just can't use it once in a while for things. This is how we're going to get through this. This is how we're going to, engage our consumers and keep our groups going. We also, during this time, had a really big need, or we found a big need for a facilitator lead, someone that could look into best practices, could do some evidence-based research, could tell us, make some training, get us into trainings to help us understand how to be a facilitator, how to make presentations using Zoom, how to engage people, how to engage our peer groups, and how to make them better. Was a great need that we had. So the next slide, change is pretty hard. So we had a few growing pains along the way. We started, really, we decided to embrace Zoom. Yes, we just had kept our peer groups going as they were, just kind of advertising them as peer groups, and they were going to be on Zoom. We thought maybe it's going to be the same thing, and we're just going to do it over Zoom. We kind of had this idea that this was going to go away in a little bit. We would get through this period, this year, maybe 9 months, a year, and then we'd go back to doing our peer groups the way we did them before. We'd open up our doors and everything would go back to the way it was before. When we were on Zoom, there was a lot of technical issues. I don't know if anybody else had, but when everybody sort of started getting on Zoom, we had some internet issues. Things were kind of in and out on our internet. Maybe our bandwidth wasn't as good as it should have been. And then just different areas, I didn't ever know that sunspots can really, affect Zoom and can make it slower. We were having some technical problems. Sometimes we didn't know how to solve those technical problems. And then in our groups, especially in our peer groups, there's nothing worse than being on Zoom and there's silence. There's that awkward silence. Everybody's looking at each other like it's just really hard to facilitate when nobody really is engaged on Zoom and they're all looking at you. So another thing too, besides the awkward silence, is the other end of the spectrum where the conversation goes from supposing to be a support group to some inappropriate conversations, really heavy. Sometimes conversations got into politics or the vaccination fights on whether vaccinations, things that really weren't supporting peers or weren't supporting, and got kind of heated and not something you would think about in a peer group. And it's really hard to stop those. Our facilitator lead at the time, he was a very big guy, and in a meeting, when you're meeting in person, he could stop some of that pretty easily if he would just, his presence made that. When you're on Zoom, it's pretty easy to get things can get out of control really easily, and we didn't quite know how to handle those things. So then we also noticed, especially in our peer support groups, that attendance was way down. Our support in all areas. We were doing them over, the whole Zoom over Eastern Wyoming, but even the places where we used to have a lot of people come to the peer support groups, they weren't involved on Zoom. So the next slide, sorry, is a picture of a light bulb that's a yellow light bulb that's illuminating. Kind of that great idea. We, had these aha moments, I guess I'd call them. So we realized as a team that Zoom wasn't going away. Even if we would go back to not having to do everything, we weren't going to stop. We need to embrace it and understand that it was a tool that when we do get to go back into, meeting people in person, it would help make things more accessible to everybody. And we needed to learn how to navigate it. We needed to do some research. Our facilitator lead did some intense research, got some trainings to know how to navigate Zoom, know how to handle those situations, those technical situations. So we needed to become Zoom experts and just do it. Understand that it wasn't going away. We needed to become better facilitators. And by facilitate, not only just, embracing people, but we needed to understand how to do that over Zoom, how to do that online, how to, outreach to people, become better facilitators, make our workshops, our peer groups more engaging, because it was different than we dealt with before. We had to embrace the difference and understand that things were changing, and we needed some skills to be able to do that. And learning was a big process that we need to open our minds to learning how to do things a different way. One of the great things that came about too was that the IEL team needed to come together. We needed to decide what kind of goals we wanted. What do we wanted these peer support groups to look like? Did we still need all of them? Did we still, could they function? What were the goals we wanted? Not just to say, well, we have a peer support group. What does that mean? What are we trying to do in these groups? We also noticed with some of our workshops that were more structured, maybe a little bit, we're engaging, we're a little bit more fun, and flexible to what the group's needs were. We noticed that our attendance was increasing in those. We had the peer support groups were going down, but the workshops that were a little bit more engaging and flexible and had structure were going up. So obviously that over Zoom was working. We found that that was working well. So we needed to apply that to our peer support groups. So then we as a team, we came together. How are we going to do this? How are we going to engage our people, our consumers? How are we going to energize these peer support groups? So one of the first things we came to was that we needed to be better facilitators, like I said. So with that, we needed some training. So our facilitator lead did some intense research, got some things, and everything was evidence-based. Everything we just didn't go out there and Google, how to be a facilitator. These things were evidence-based. They had proof, that they would work. One of the biggest things that we noticed, or that we use, I guess even today, is that, and we had already been working with, was the RTC University of Montana Healthy Community Living Facilitator Training. We took that and really, not just for the Healthy Community Living series that we still do to this day, but also to help us learn how to facilitate in a really great manner using videos and engaging, and it can be done over Zoom. We have our own will facilitator training that our lead facilitator came up with that we go through. We use evidence-based videos, and one of my favorite videos, I guess, I have on here was how to avoid death by PowerPoint, where the presenter wasn't a very likable character. I guess he's very, I don't know, maybe a little arrogant, but I still remember everything he told me or the points he made. So he had his facts, why this works and how your brain works and how you can only see so much on a slide. Your brain only takes in so much, and especially over Zoom or over online, process, your brain doesn't take in as much. So you have to do things a little bit differently. And one of those things is make sure your PowerPoints are not too busy, and you use your PowerPoint as a tool, not as a reading. You don't just read off your slides. So it was a really good evidence-based videos, when we've used some others too that are included in our facilitator training. We got really good with Zoom. We have some Zoom training, not only for ourselves, but also for our consumers, to train consumers how to, get online. We have, we can help consumers get their technology. We have iPads. We have, internet access too, that we can help consumers if they want to get onto our peer groups, and with that social isolation piece. And then one of the big trainings we have was from Via Hope out of Texas, and they do a peer facilitator training. They did it for all our specialists at the time. And this is really how to facilitate a peer group. And it also brought us together to help with our goals as a SIL, to help with our goals as a program, and as each group, what each group wants to do as a group. So it was really, really a great training too that we will continue to use throughout our training with facilitating in peer groups. And then from that, like I said, we use that to come together as a team, as a program, and decide what our team wanted to do as a peer group. So that was really cool and really engaging as far as bringing our team together for what our goals we wanted them to be. So I just realized I never let Jenna introduce herself. But so I'll let her introduce herself before she starts to speak in the next portion. But I was just wondering if there was any questions or comments.
So everyone, this is Melly, and if you have some questions or comments, please use the Q&A and I will read those out, and Joelle can jump in with a response.
I can go ahead and introduce myself while we're waiting for that.
Sounds great, Jenna.
Thanks. My name is Jenna Rector. I am an independent living specialist for Wyoming Independent Living. I work out of the Casper office. I'm a white female with blondish brown long hair, in my early 40s.
I'm not seeing anything in the Q&A, so I would say continue on.
Okay, I guess next slide, Joelle. Okay, so engage and energize, what does that mean? We took our peer support groups and workshops, and the first thing we looked at was some of the names, particularly for the support groups. Our peer support group was just called peer support group. So kind of boring, not very interesting sounding, sounds kind of like the same old thing. So we changed the name of that, as well as some of the other groups that we'll talk about. We also moved to a consistent format. So what does that mean? When we went to a consistent format, we wanted something that people could count on. Our groups, as Joel had mentioned, had sort of gotten a little off topic, I guess, and disability, the peer support group sort of became like a complaining, a place where people would go and complain, or maybe just a couple of people would dominate the conversation. So people didn't really know what they could expect when they attend the group. And we didn't want that. That's not what we wanted. We wanted a format where people knew, when they joined, they knew what they could expect, and that it would be engaging and energizing, and we would have a topic that's what we would, focus on for the day. And we also, because of the prior incidences with, some arguments maybe coming up or something like that, we set our housekeeping rules. We as a team came together and decided what were important, messages to have at the beginning of each session. One of them being no politics, no hateful comments towards each other, no personal attacks on anyone, something that, just basic rules that people would respect and, know what they were getting into. And then of course, just, muting your camera when you're not on, when you're not speaking. And then the last thing, of course, we wanted was peer involvement in all decisions. And I think this was really a game changer. We took it to the consumers. What do you guys want to talk about? What sort of things are you interested in learning about? And that we took the feedback we got from that and went with that. We had, changed the peer support group to provide education in topics that people were interested in and activities that people wanted to do. And so this, I think, was a big game changer for our groups. And the last thing was 2 facilitators in each center. And this was more for technical reasons, because, if there's a group going on and the internet goes down in Casper, we would have a co-facilitator in Cheyenne that could pick up right there, and then the group doesn't lose anything, because we now have people connecting across all of Eastern Wyoming. So we're hitting our rural areas, and we want to be able to not have little interruptions like that when something like the internet going down. So next slide, please. So this created, these little changes that we made created huge expansion for us. We saw a 65% increase in attendance, which I think is pretty significant for our groups. We were pretty excited about this. We also went from having an average of 2 to 3 attendees in specific centers. So, the center in Cheyenne would have 1 or 2 consumers show up, and then a separate meeting would be taking place in Casper, Sheridan, and with only these couple of people. And now with Zoom, we're able to connect. We have a minimum of 6 to 9 people attending, and that's across Eastern Wyoming, hitting our rural areas too, so that our peers up there can join as well. We also saw an increase in referrals from other entities, such as case managers, transition coordinators, high schools and colleges. And I think this was also partially due to our increased efforts at outreach. We really stepped up our efforts there. Now that we have these great groups going, we got flyers that advertised them. We got the message out there into the community, so people knew that we were holding these groups, and that definitely helped increase attendance. We also almost doubled the amount of new consumers requesting services and completing goals. And so this is another piece that we were very excited about, because supporting consumers in achieving their goals is what our goal is as specialists. So to actually have this impact, just, from people starting by maybe just joining one of our groups and then getting interested in becoming setting a goal and following through with that. And so we were extremely excited to see these results. And now the IL specialists are ready and trained to develop new groups. So that means that when we hear feedback from amongst our consumers about a topic or something that they want more education on, we can facilitate just maybe a one-time workshop that addresses that, or we can actually create a whole new group that meets regularly to achieve that. So that's really exciting moving forward. Next slide, please. So Disability Connection. So this is the name of our group that I mentioned before that was simply called Disability Peer Support Group. The boring name. We came up with Disability Connection because that just creates images in people's minds of connecting with others, and that's what we want this group to be about. Making new connections with other people that have different disabilities. And this is a cross-disability group that meets. It's people with all kinds of different disabilities. And we changed from the unstructured format to the peer support through structured activities. So, before we kind of were a little bit unstructured in what was happening with these groups, but now people know what they can expect. And this part I'm really excited about on this group is we have, so we alternate weeks. So we have move it, learn it, and do it. And we alternate each week and do one of the others. So move it, for example, that's where we do some sort of exercise. We've done Zumba, we've done Tai Chi, and it's all accessible from, a person could do it in a wheelchair, and there's accommodations made within the videos. And so we do that one week, and then we do learn it. And again, this is where we've listened to the feedback from our consumers on topics of interest, and then we'll read an article or maybe take a tour of the national parks and look at all of the accessible features that each one has to offer. And then that will generate a discussion. And so that one's exciting. And then my favorite is Do It, which we have this thing called connection boxes, which we mail out every month. And it has all the materials and supplies a person will need to do the Do It activity for that month. So we've done things like canvas art painting, vintage card making, which was really fun. We painted pots and then potted little succulents in them. So just fun activities that we do together. And then as we're doing these activities, the discussion kind of flows to things that people want to talk about. And it's just a positive, good experience for everyone. And people really seem to enjoy it. So, and so we share knowledge, throughout all of these and in ways of adapting to and living with disabilities, so they're excellent for anyone with a disability. I think they're really a good way for people that are new to disability to connect with people and sort of learn, because that can be one of the hardest parts, for people. And so, we believe that true peer support is a group creating a community of connection and acceptance. And, I know in some of the other sessions, we've had the topic of inclusion, and that's what we strive to do, an inclusive environment that's accepting of everyone, and everyone feels welcome and is excited to be a part of it. So I do have one story to share about a consumer that was really impacted by our group. As an example for this one. So she was suffering from severe anxiety, agoraphobia. She would not leave her apartment. So she was becoming extremely socially isolated. And she started working with one of our specialists and then started attending some of the Disability Connection meetings. And she sort of came out of her shell and sort of started to thrive actually in these. She actually set a goal related to facilitating teaching art, because she was an artist, and she did that. She taught an art class on one of our Disability Connection meetings for the other peers. So that was awesome. She also spoke at our peer advocacy conference. She let people, it was through Zoom, but she showed people her actual artwork within her apartment and talked about it. And so it's made a huge difference in her life, and she's got all kinds of new goals that she wants to set now. So I'm super amazed and happy with how much of a change this has made for her. Truly a significant difference in her life. And then we had another consumer that was also very socially isolated up in Sheridan, and she was just sort of depressed and not leaving her home again, not quite the level of anxiety as the other consumer, but definitely struggling. And she started attending some of the groups, and now I would say she attends all of our groups. She's our biggest supporter, and she even speaks on the meetings, which before she never would. So it's made a huge difference in her life too, and she even spoke about that as well to our group. So Disability Connection's been awesome for people. Next slide, please. So Ammo for Advocating. This is another one where we had to change the group. It was just called Monthly Advocacy Peer Support Group. So Ammo for Advocating. It's pretty much what it says in the title. We moved from talking about change to specific educational topics on individual and systems advocacy. So we took actual topics that people wanted to learn more or be educated about, and we'll discuss that in the meetings. And then this is information that can be used for the other group, YDPAC, to actually move forward with these changes and initiatives at the legislative level. So it's ammo for their advocating, and it's awesome, and been a huge change to the group now that we have gone to this consistent format where people know what they're getting into. It's not just a political argument, whereas it may have been turning into that before. So the peers collaborate with YDPAC, and the group discusses how to move disability advocacy forward. And Joelle, did you have a story to share about ammo of a peer or no?
Yeah, it became evident, I guess, when we were working, like I said before, this YDPAC group started with a couple of peer advocates that just wanted to start a group. I mean, we had a few talk with ADAPT had come in, and although we didn't quite want to maybe be that intense, but it really there just became such a need through the YDPAC group that we needed education on things. So this monthly peer group that had been started and was kind of the beginning of our advocacy motion for Will, really brought about the YDPAC group, which is the grassroots, and then that group brought about the change to the monthly advocacy group and that education that was needed. So it was just kind of neat how the learning through peers, actually, this is what the peers wanted, this is what they kept asking for, has come kind of full circle with these advocacy groups. And their support of each other and what the needs are going forward. Because there are some people that do not, some consumers that do not want to do, they don't want to do a march on the Capitol, or they don't want to do some of that more intensive in your face type of advocacy. They would rather, be educated, maybe help, in the background type thing. So these two groups really work together as peer support groups in advocacy with everybody's superpowers, I guess, to make disability advocacy move forward in the state of Wyoming. So
Thanks, Joelle. Next slide, please. So moving forward, what are our plans moving forward? Well, we've decided we now love Zoom because it allows us to connect across our state and get those consumers that live in those very rural areas. So we're going to move to more of a hybrid structure because we also love to see people face-to-face in person in our centers. So we have this fantastic technology called the OWL. And we have one in each of our centers. And what this does, this little thing, it looks kind of like an owl, is if we have 3 or 4 or 8 consumers that want to come into the center and meet, we can set up the owl in the conference room, and this thing will actually focus on whoever's speaking and project that. And then of course on the projector, you have all of the people that are connecting via Zoom, you know, from more rural areas, so that everybody, including center to center, is all connected. And I think that's an awesome way to move forward, just because we can have larger groups, and I think it creates these more positive connections with people all over the state instead of just in Casper or just in Cheyenne. So increased access, that's what's important here, is reaching those rural people. We're also going to continue to increase our outreach and public awareness. We're planning to do some open houses in our various centers, and this is to enhance our community awareness, because the more partners we have in there out in the community, potential stakeholders that are aware of what kind of services we offer and what we can maybe partner on and make stronger or better, is very important and critical to growing our you know, positive effects in the communities. And then we are going to continue to assess and listen to the feedback that we're hearing from community and consumers. What do they want? What do they want to talk about? What issues are important to them? Or what activities do they want to do? You know, fun things. And then we're going to take that into consideration as we're moving forward with new groups. And then we'll implement peer groups as needed. We now have the ability to know what's necessary and what kind of resources we need to create new groups or start new workshops, and we're always learning and seeking more options for people depending on what they want. So that's what we're hoping things look like moving forward. Next slide. I think that's the Yes. So thank you for coming to our session. And now we would love to answer any of your questions or hear any of your comments that you may have.
All right. So I did see in the chat, this is Melly, that a few people had mentioned that they were also using the OWL and liked that, so great plug. And the first question that we have, and the rest of you folks, please put some questions in the Q&A. We've got about 10 minutes left, so we would love to utilize them with questions or comments. So question number 1 is, how do you pay for the staff supporting the support groups? Does it come out of your base funding, or do you have other funding to support this?
I'll let Joelle answer that one.
Yeah, that's, you know, it comes out of our base funding. It's part of our independent living specialists are paid. It's part of their job description is to do these peer support groups. And yes.
Someone is also asking for your contact information to be put in the chat. If you're willing to do that, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. Yes, we can do that.
Awesome. The next question, the SIL I'm working at only does peer support individually, and I'm wondering how you can do that in a group setting, as ours is very goal focused with the goal that particular consumer sets.
Well, I think it's kind of the same, but the group has a goal. You know, you have to set up before you start the peer support group, it's really important. I believe one of the things we found out during this time was that there needs to be a goal. It can't just say we're going to have a peer support group. So going through that goal process, but just understanding what your group is all about, and having your group, your consumers, you have to realize sometimes the goal may change. The goal may, need some flexibility. But I guess reading your group or what you want to accomplish to begin with, I think it's really important to understand what the goal is that you as a cell want to accomplish, and then go from there. But just using that goal and the plan steps that we all use with individual consumers is really helpful in starting a group as well. It's just a little different. You have a group of people instead of a bunch of individual goals. But then it too can really leads into individual. That's one thing that's pretty neat, is it leads into a lot of times into individual goals. So somebody that may start with a peer support group or a disability connection may just be kind of filling us out of what we're all about. But then it may turn into, a goal, an individual goal, as well as the group goal for the group itself.
Awesome, thank you. We have a couple more questions. The next one is, would you say that more group participants were already consumers working on individual goals, or were individuals becoming consumers to participate in the group? Nice question, I like it.
Yeah, that's a great question, because it was really kind of neat. During COVID, I think it depends, I guess, on what the group is really. But when we revamped the peer support group and went to the disability connection, I think that I always say it's our starting group to bring people in, and they kind of have a good time. And then that leads into more goals. Like with the advocacy group, they were more people that had already started goals, and then that maybe was their goals. They came together because they did have advocacy goals. So it kind of depends on the group as to whether it's and identifying those needs, I guess, of the communities that we work with, as to whether it's those that already have goals or new people coming in.
And I would just add that, like, disability connection now, I think that's sort of people testing the waters and finding out what Wyoming independent living is all about. So that's how a lot of the new people actually, meet us initially, but then we have our people that they've just been consumers at will forever, and they attend too. So I'd say both. There's people that already have goals and are consumers, and then there's the new people that end up starting goals once they start the group. So
awesome. Next question. What strategies do you use for outreach? Have you found any to be more successful than others in getting attendees?
Well, yeah, we did this little experiment too, that with outreach, because we had lost consumers. If we increased, we had lost about 65%. Our numbers had gone down of new consumers. And so we did this little experiment to see if we did 65% more outreach, would it increase our numbers? And the team did, I would say they did way more than 65%. Tremendous outreach. And we started thinking outside the box, and that really helped. Even I have a consumer that takes, or I have there is a specialist that does outreach with his barber. He puts all our fire, we started doing, again, we always do emails. We have a big email list. we send everything to. And then we started going back to mailing or paper flyers because people were receiving so much email during this time that we started mailing out some paper flyers. Just thinking outside the box, we really started building relationships with entities. Those that, serve people with disabilities and those that don't. I mean, building relationships with entities that could get the word out about us, because there are people that just don't know. They know that we do things, or that maybe we can help somebody with access to their home. But some of these other programs just aren't known about. And it's a continued talk about what we do, and building those relationships. And it's not just once. The specialists contact these entities, to remind them what's going on again and again, and just getting the word out there.
Love that. We have just about 3 minutes left, and I just wanted to ask a follow-up question. Jenna, you mentioned, just having 2 facilitators on so that if the internet went down. I don't know how familiar folks are with the dynamics in Wyoming, but it's very rural, friends. If you haven't been there, my favorite thing about Wyoming, I don't know if it's my favorite thing, but in the wintertime, they close the roads with those big sort of like train arms, and you can't get through. So I've got caught in that a couple of times. But can you just talk a little bit more about those challenges with the internet and anything that you might have done? I know I'm in Arizona, and we've gone back to some of the same thing, mailing things and those sorts of things, but we've also sent out a fair amount of technology. I'm just wondering if that's been something that you all have done too in Wyoming, just given the internet challenges.
We have, and that's so we also have a bunch of iPads that we will loan out to people to try, and especially some of our older people that got really socially isolated during the pandemic, teaching them to use that so that they are able to connect, when they're completely shut off from the world, they can still connect to these groups. So that's been part of it. And then just the internet can be a challenge up here, definitely. Did you add anything to that, Joelle?
Oh, just that we do have, the iPads have like hotspots in them, so if they don't have internet, and it's still a challenge, we don't have internet in all our areas, so and with COVID, it was a challenge because we had to mail things, and but we got that process pretty well down where, we send a box with them, they can return we use the mail. We got pretty creative, I think, on how to do that and how to reach our really rural, consumer.
That's excellent. Well, we've got just 1 minute to wrap up. Any final comments before we do that from our presenters?
I guess I just wanted to say, if anybody wants to contact us, has any, would like any more information, it is a work in process. We're not, we're, like I said, we want to keep learning, and or any ideas anybody might have, please feel free to contact us. And we're so excited we got to present today.
And we're so excited to have you. So thank you both so very much. Thank you to everyone on in the foreground and in the background for making this happen for the April conference in 2022. Just want to remind everyone to complete their surveys. We really do use that information to ensure that we're bringing to you in the future what it is that you would like. And also come on back. We have a half-an-hour break, and there's 4 great sessions next time. So please join us. Thank you all so very much. Thank you to those folks who are creating access for us today. We appreciate you all. Take care.
Thank you.